Dana Brigman of the Canine Coach Carolinas and Well-Oiled Canine. Today, I am very happy to bring Dr. Barb Fox into our podcast family. Dr. Barb is a holistic veterinarian based in Iowa, but don't fret, she does online consultations, writes books, speaks around the country, and even has some really great, affordable online classes for pet nutrition regarding dogs and cats, and also classes on essential oils for dogs, cats, or horses. She has a really amazing book, The Animals Never Lie and The Infinite Bond. If you're looking for real-life case studies of essential oil use in medical cases and the real power of essential oils, read The Animals Never Lie today. You can find her at barbfoxdvm.teachable.com. And while this may be her first podcast with us, I've already told her it won't be her last. So we're going to spend today talking about the relationship of emotions between the pet and the guardian. So welcome to you, Dr. Barb.
Thank you, Dana. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your podcast. So I have been a holistic veterinarian for about 14 years now. I started out conventionally, graduated from Iowa State University in 1994, and did the things that I was supposed to do, that I thought I was supposed to do: vaccinate, treat ear infections, treat skin allergies, do surgeries. And after a while, it got to be kind of frustrating, especially when you'd have that animal that would come in with ear infections for the 5th time in a row. And it was my own health scare that I had in 2007 when I was diagnosed with a very aggressive breast cancer that I chose the holistic route to go for my treatment. Now, I had surgery to have the lump removed, but that's all they took. I did not go through any chemo or radiation. I did that because I had seen my mother die from uterine cancer 4 years prior to that, and I saw the horrific side effects that she went through. And I guess as a medical professional, knowing what chemo and radiation does to the body, I just couldn't put myself through that. So it was a very, very, what do I want to say, a really good learning experience. I mean, it taught me so much about my own body. And then I got to thinking, if this works for me, holy cow, what's it going to do for my animal patients? And so I started diving into everything I could. I actually had a large animal veterinarian friend of mine that got me into essential oils, because he said, Barb, if you've got cancer, you've got to be doing oils. And then he explained why. And it's just been a learning experience ever since then. You know, nutrition, homeopathy, herbals, Reiki, acupuncture, chiropractic, light therapy, vibrational therapy, it all plays a part. I mean, I'm just naming off a handful of modalities, Dana, but it's just, so that's how I've gotten into it. And it's just like a breath of fresh air getting into the holistic aspect, because medications and drugs and surgery can only do so much. And oftentimes they're just band-aiding a problem, and it's not fixing the root cause of the problem. Mm-hmm. So when I got into looking at all this, looking at, let me back up. A holistic practitioner looks at the mind, body, spirit, because it's all interlaced together. And I was oftentimes finding examples of where animals would be getting sick because of their owners' emotions. And we'll get into a little bit more detail of that later, but I had the perfect experience of at least understanding how animals have emotions with my 2 Arabian horses that died 24 hours apart. Wow. The one horse, and I wrote about this in The Infinite Bond, the one horse died because he had a medical condition that was not responding to anything. And granted, this is before I was into holistic medicine. I am confident I could have fully saved his life had I known about holistic treatments before that. But his best buddy, they had been together almost, 15 years. And they were just like little brothers, bicker and fight, but, they had to be in each other's sight all the time. And when I had to put the one horse down, the other one died 24 hours later, and he'd never been sick a day in his life. And I'm truly convinced it was from grief, the way that everything transpired.
That must have
So,
been hard on you too.
oh, it was because I think a veterinarian's worst nightmare is having to put your own animal to sleep. And I had to put both of my friends down within a 24-hour period.
Wow.
So it was pretty traumatic.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. So this morning I saw a quote, and I think the universe was speaking to me. It was from Gary Young. And a little excerpt of it says, everything that goes on in your life is determined by emotion, runny nose or sore backside. It is always there before the physical manifests. So what does that mean to you? Because I think a lot of times that pet parents, pet guardians, they don't really resonate with their own emotions in some cases, and therefore we don't always look and see that our animals have emotions that might need to be dealt with as well. So what can you share about that?
I can share a lot, Dana. Thank you. What that means is when Gary Young made that quote, if we look at the body, and we all know that we have an electrical field around our body, otherwise our brains wouldn't be functioning, our heart wouldn't be beating, our intestines wouldn't be moving, that kind of thing. And this invisible energy field around us is what we call actually the aura. Mm. And those people who have had Reiki sessions or are into, the more spiritual aspect of health and disease know what the auras are. We also call that the metaphysical body. That's not the physical body, but the body that is just outside in that aura. And so if our aura is disrupted by a thought, an emotion, I'm going to go out there and say even 5G and some of our, the electromagnetic fields that affect the aura, we oftentimes have that affecting the aura. And if the aura isn't healed or fixed, then physical disease manifests in the body. I used to keep a journal of all of the things that are shared between owner and pet. Mm-hmm. For example, a dog came in, a little dachshund, and I see you have dachshunds too, don't you? Yeah. Little dachshund came in, and 2 years old, perfectly healthy, shiny coat, coughing. Cough, 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 cough. Could not figure out. The heart sounded perfect. We took x-rays, did blood work. Everything came out perfect. Yet this dog was coughing. So I thought, well, maybe it has some kind of irritation. There weren't any smokers in the house or anything like that. But I thought, well, maybe he's allergic to something. Again, this is before I was into holistic medicine. So I put him on prednisone. Mm-hmm. And I was explaining the side effects of prednisone to the owner, and she interrupts me and she goes, oh, I know all about that. I have idiopathic pneumonitis. Basically, that's meaning she's got a lung condition that has no known cause.
Wow.
And I got to thinking, wow, that's weird. About an hour later, a guy walks into the clinic I was working at. He's got a little dog, actually is a medium-sized dog that torn its ACL in the hind leg. And so for those of you who don't know what an ACL, that's a ruptured cruciate ligament, similar to what football players do when they wreck their knees out.
All my pit bull fans will know what that's about.
Okay.
We blow out pit bull knees all the time.
Right. So I was explaining that this dog probably needed surgery, would have to be referred out. And he goes, oh, I totally understand all that. And he pulls his pant leg up and he says, he showed me the big scar on his knee. He says, I just had ACL surgery 2 weeks ago.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And then, I started documenting. Here's another example. A dog comes in congestive heart failure. And I'm explaining the treatment protocol and what's going on. Oh, I know all about dilated cardiomyopathy. I have that myself. I'm in heart failure. So I quit documenting this after I get about 2 or 3 pages full of these things that were shared between the owner and the animal, and even anxiety, which we'll get into here in a minute. But I didn't know if you had any other questions for me or if I've covered that.
Well, I find that incredibly fascinating. And so in those cases, the animal is picking up the the health issue of the human and sort of taking that on into their own health issues? Is that what's happening?
Well, Dana, I have no scientific proof of this, but you see it over and over again, and I call this evidence-based medicine. I have the evidence in front of me this is happening. I really truly believe our animals come to us for a purpose, whether that's for companionship, protection, as a teacher, but mainly they want to keep us healthy. And if we are unhealthy, they're going to take on our stuff for us, if that makes any sense. And again, you have to, you see, right? Oh, and it's just one of those things that if you don't believe it, you will believe it when you see it.
So what do we do about that? If our animal is, and sometimes I think the human handler doesn't even know they have a medical issue, and the dog or the cat or horse is presenting something that may be mirrored in the human that they haven't even identified yet. You as a veterinarian can't treat the human, and I certainly as a trainer and essential oil user can't treat a guardian. I mean, I can't even treat the dog, but I can't treat the guardian for sure. But how do we have those conversations with people?
It's tough sometimes, and mainly it's the emotional part. For example, I just consulted with a lady in Canada a few weeks ago, and she adopts these horses that have issues. And mainly the issues are anxiety, to the point where she's getting hurt because the animal, the horse is bolting or rearing, or she's getting dumped off, and so on and so forth. And then she would talk about how these horses would just stand and tremor sometimes. And even though her voice was very calm, I intuitively picked up that she had an anxiety disorder, and she does. She has a horrible anxiety disorder. And so then I have to have that very gentle but yet very firm talk with her, saying, before you're going to expect these horses to heal, you have to heal yourself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it's tough. We don't like to admit we have issues, you know. We don't like to admit there's something wrong with us. And it's a little tougher even with the physical aspect, like you mentioned. I had 3 horses with metabolic disease. And then I had to look at my life going, oh, no wonder I'm the big stress. Maybe I'm causing this. Because at the time I was married to, let's just put it this way, I have a permanent no contact order against my ex-husband for the rest of my life. Now I'm happily remarried, so that's all good. But at that time I was in a job I absolutely loathed. I love being a veterinarian, but this is a very dysfunctional clinic. Long hours, sometimes 20 hours a day. The work was expected to be done. And so I was carrying around all the stress. No wonder my horses were getting sick. And once I fixed myself, then I could be assured that they weren't going to take this stuff on for me.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So I spend a lot of time working with rescue groups and rescue animals, and we often get it, and my area of expertise is in the dogs and dog behavior. So, but don't limit your conversation there. But where I'm headed with this is we often see dogs that have had some past trauma, past abuse, or at least our theory is that there has been some abuse, right? And we as humans sort of hold on to that story. We tell that story over and over and over again. And a lot of times what I'll say or see is I can't help that dog move forward in their behavior until the human believes it's possible, lets go of the story in some way, quits holding them in that space. Can you talk a little bit about what we're doing to the animals when we do that?
Sure, I can, Dina. A good example would be, I love to tell stories. So here's a good example of what happened to a boxer. So this is one of the clinics I'd worked in, and I'd seen this dog every year for his annual examination, and it was a nice little boxers. And so when this boxer's about 6 years old, her owner called me and said, Dr. Barb, she says, the dog's name is Valentine. She said, Valentine's starting to bite, and she's bitten my son, she's bitten me, and I don't know, I might have to put her to sleep. And my heart just started to hurt because this dog was really nice, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. So I, at that time, had a holistic office in the same town that I had worked at the conventional clinic. And so I said, why don't you bring Valentine in, and we'll do a little emotional release session with her. And she goes, what do you mean by an emotional release? I said, we're going to use some essential oils. Mm-hmm. I'll just use them, let her sniff them, put them on topically, and let her release those emotions. Well, what the narrative was actually, Dana, was that this lady, the owner, was actually, she was coming out of the closet. She'd been married for 25 years. And when she told her husband that she, had issue with her sexuality, and he just went off the deep end. And so there was a lot of tension. There was depression, crying. This is when the dog started to bite. Mm. And so when I sat down with Valentine in my lap, in my office, I sat on the floor, had her come in my lap, and I just let her sniff all the oils. I think I used like rose, Roman chamomile, vetiver, valerian, lavender, frankincense, palmarosa, and rose. I might have mentioned that already. And a few commercially prepared blends. That dog's whole demeanor changed. And that after that session, she never bit anybody again.
Amazing.
But I also had to tell the owner, you know what, this is the best thing you've done, is come out and let this out, this news. Now we can heal the whole family. And so oftentimes it's tough because we've got to treat the human before we can fix the dog or the cat or the horse or the guinea pig or whatever is in there. And there's a scientific term for this, Dana, and I'm sure you've heard of it, but Dr. Ron Ham really explained this well at one of the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association conventions. He talked about for 6 hours on energy entanglement, where our energy fields entangle with our pets. Sorry about that.
Oh, you're fine.
And it was amazing because if you think about it, we're all energetically connected, the animals, the trees, everything. So if I try to explain energy entanglement, it oftentimes turns people off. They don't get it. Right. All I can say is give an example of, like, you walk into a room, you meet a stranger, immediately you feel yourself start to back off from that person. You know there's something negative holding on, some kind of negative entity or spirit or something with that person. And you just immediately, you want to back off. Like, and the flip side of that is you meet somebody, you really hit it off all of a sudden. And that's the way it is with our animals. Our animals, have you ever heard of an animal growling at a person and you don't know why, because that person hasn't done anything, but that animal's sensing something about that human,
So, if we had an animal that has come to us that truly has had some trauma or emotional abuse, what can we do for them? It's not always a training issue. I think a lot of times when people call me, they just want training, right? And so when I start talking about some of this other stuff, that they look at me like I've got 14 heads and think I'm crazy, because I'm not talking training. I'm talking energy and emotion and that sort of thing. But what can you say as a veterinarian and of your education about what do we as people or guardians need to do to help those animals move beyond their past?
Great question. And I'm sorry, I kind of got off topic on that last little bit there because I was going to answer that and then I wanted to tell that story. So what we can do to let go is not repeat the same narrative. We're not a broken record. And if we feel like we've got to revisit that situation that the animal's in, all we're doing is attracting the same energy. the same thoughts, the same feelings. If we learn to let it go and only picture the good stuff that's going to happen in the future, that dog is going to heal up really, really quickly. But again, if we keep that, I'm trying to think of a really simple way of explaining it. Closing the book, closing the chapter, and not revisiting that, not rereading it. If we as humans can just think of, let's writing a new chapter where
Exactly.
where that dog is, right.
Because I tell people, you have in some cases created the story, because when we get a rescue dog, we don't always know what the story really was. So we create a story around that and we hold on to it and we repeat it and we tell it and we tell it and we use it as an excuse often. Oh, but he's a rescue. Oh, but he was abused. Oh, but he had whatever, right? And I'm like, rewrite that. Rewrite where we're going is what I want to think about.
Yeah. It would be the same if a child has abuse. We don't want to keep telling the child, you were abused. You went through this horrible thing. Because then that's all that child's going to remember that. And our animals, our dogs are children, our children. Yeah. And we've got to look out for them just like we do our kids, our human kids.
Awesome. So we often hear, and I've said this a lot, and sometimes I'm not sure I'm very good at describing it to people, but we hear that emotions live in our organs or in our cellular memory.
Yes.
Anger in the liver is part of what my clients will have heard me say many times, or fear in the kidneys, grief in the lungs, and so on. What does that mean to you as a veterinarian and as an emotional healer?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, say if I have a dog that comes in and it's got elevated liver enzymes. As a veterinarian, we're going to look at the physical aspect. Was it exposed to a toxin? Was that dog exposed to yard chemicals? Was it, did it eat some bad food in the liver? But then we have to think about, okay, so then I'm very perceptive and I try to read the human. And it's just second nature to me. I don't even think about consciously doing that, but you can tell by facial expressions, by the way that the human handles their dog, that maybe there is some anger built up in that animal. And I believe truly that these abuse cases store that. Now, there's no way to prove that this happens, but oftentimes when I tell people, okay, so lungs can hold grief, the liver holds anger, the kidneys hold fear, they look at me like, like you said earlier, you got 14 heads. But they say, how do you know that? How can you prove that? And I said, well, here's something that I want you to think about. If you have a lung issue and you've just lost a loved one, would you maybe not think that there was some correlation there? Have you had somebody that's been really nasty to you and all of a sudden you have some digestive issues? I can't prove that, but I can make a correlation. And I say sometimes, how do you prove love? Do you love your dog? Well, yeah, I love my dog. Prove it. There's no scientific study you can do to prove that. Right. So I truly think that, and this has been studied for centuries, if not many more years than that. And this is all part of the Chinese medical model. And I truly think that happens, when I had cancer. So and this would go on to, this would transpose onto dogs too. The thought process behind cancer is long-standing resentment, deep grief, or the thought of what's the use? And if we look at the cases of cancer and try to correlate that with the dogs or the cats or the horses, I'm just talking about any animal. Just like I said, when my horses got sick because I was under stress, this is a very real thing.
Do you think it works in reverse? And what I mean by that is, and I guess I'll say I believe that it does, but I'm really curious about your opinion. So I work with a lot of aggressive cases, for example, or a lot of cases that have fear and anxiety in dogs. And one of the things now that I've started to look at after learning from holistic vets like yourself and the aromatherapy classes and that sort of thing is, let's take a look at that. And so I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but we have perhaps a dog that has been annual vaccines, regular flea and tick topicals, poorly fed diet or kibble-based diet. And can that build up a burden in the liver, for example, that in turn then presents as a behavioral problem? Does it work that way?
I truly believe it does, Dana. And we've got to keep those things, like all the things you just mentioned, when we're putting all these toxins and poisons in our dog's body. Darn right, it can congest that liver to the point where it creates problems with the behavior. And so, I don't think there's I think one hand washes the other that way. The liver has to be healthy to function. And as far as the behavior, yes, if that liver's full of toxins, you imagine how that dog's going to feel with all those toxins in its body. It's not going to be happy. It's not going to be friendly. It's going to feel kind of crappy. And so if we make sure that we're doing the best for our animals, that behavior, oh yes, it absolutely can change for the better.
Yeah. I'll just share a little story of my own. When I first heard this, my mind was kind of blown a little bit, and I thought, that can't be true. I mean, that just sounds like nonsense to me. And so I know that I know how my energy felt at the time, and I know my diet at that time was not great. I know that was before I had really made a huge transition into a wellness lifestyle or a natural lifestyle. So I thought, I'm going to try this on myself. I didn't want to try things with dogs that I hadn't really understood or tried on my own. So long story short, I grabbed some of the essential oils recommended for supporting the liver, and I applied it every day for 21 days over my liver and went on about my business. And the short story of that is people along the way, a couple weeks in, said, we don't know what you're doing different, but we like it. Keep it up. Because I was less of a short fuse. I was just more content, more calm, more happy. And I can only attribute it to doing sort of this liver work, which then led me to do a real liver cleanse and move on about that. And so now I learned from the dogs how to apply that into my own life. So you mentioned applying your health issues into the animal space. I came at it from just the opposite approach. I saw
it worked
benefits
both ways
and brought it back to myself. Yeah. So awesome.
Excellent.
Any other comments in that area, or anything that you want to share with us that I have not brought up yet? I'm open to learning what I don't know.
Well, we could talk about a lot of different things, but I think the bottom line, Dana, is that emotions are a very real thing when we think about physical health. And that is something that I think a lot of clients of mine are still, I shouldn't say of mine, because I have more holistic clients that are already on the same page as I am. But for those who are just learning about this, it's one of those things that you're not going to hear from your regular veterinarian. You're probably not going to hear this on mainstream news, but you have to dig deep. And one of my colleagues and good friends, Dr. Nancy Brandt, has a whole half-hour video on digging deep, getting to the truth. And you mentioned diet before. My gosh, we could do a whole day workshop on diet and how that affects all the organ systems. But even things like our vaccines, and I just created a new vaccine course, and it's not an anti-vaccine course, but it's called Vaccinations. Are they your animal's friend or their foe? So I go through the whole thing about that, but I have seen a lot of behavior changes. After a dog comes in and gets a rabies vaccine, there's an actual thing called miasm, rabies miasm, which is a behavior change that looks a lot like rabies.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a ton of stuff we don't know yet. And I would just encourage your followers to remain open-minded as possible and to not, and to question everything. When you go into your veterinarian's office, do you really have to have year-round this and that? I mean, like if you live in certain parts of the United States, yeah, you have to be cautious for heartworm certain times of the year, or maybe all year round. But if you live out in a desert area, do you really need heartworm 12 months out of the year? But I didn't mean to get into all that, but
You're fine.
it's the yeah, it's the toxin overload that affects the body and the mind and the spirit. And just like you said, when you started to clean up your diet and you put that oil on your liver area, you felt better. I know that people who've gone through like a 21-day fast using cayenne pepper, lemonade, and maple syrup, and they talk about how emotionally happy they are when they're done with the fast. So yeah, and same thing with the kibble diet. That's the worst thing we can do for our animals. And I know you teach this, so I don't want to step on your toes, but
Yeah.
I'm just here to say that I try everything on my own animals before I recommend it to anybody else. And so my family, my animal family here they're my guinea pigs. And just going by observation, you can see a ton of change when you get them onto a fresh food diet.
Right. So you've mentioned nutrition, feeding a fresh diet, taking a look at what we're doing with vaccines and your class, for example. Are there any other key recommendations you would suggest to, I call them dog mamas or dog lovers, but any recommendations that you would suggest for somebody who's thinking about how do I move forward in this natural wellness lifestyle with my pets, because it can feel really overwhelming. So what besides that can they start with?
Are you meaning, Dana, what modality to start with, or like how they would learn about more things?
I mean, what can they do like today? What changes could they make, or things could they eliminate from their dog's lifestyle or their home, or protocols that would really help them move forward in adopting a more natural lifestyle approach? So modalities might be appropriate. I'm thinking like cleaning products and all that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we want to treat the pet like your dogs, like God intended them to be treated. That means that they get adequate exercise, they have fresh water, they have a fresh food diet, they have a safe haven. A lot of people don't realize that an animal, especially in a chaotic household with, say, like they got a lot of kids or they're doing daycare, that pet needs to have a safe haven where they can get away from all the chaos and the stress. They need the exercise. And I cringe, and I'm hoping I'm not stepping on any toes, but a lot of times I see people adopting a large breed dog that needs a lot of exercise and having a 1-bedroom apartment, and then they're at work all day. Now, that hasn't been the case the last couple months, but you get the picture.
Yeah.
So, and cleaning products, our pets are walking across the floors. They're, being exposed to what we put on the yard. How many dogs have I seen, even though the yard chemical company comes and they spray it and they say, let your dog back on it after 24 hours. I say 3 to 4 days with a heavy rain, then I would feel maybe comfortable putting that dog out on the grass, because I can't tell you how many times in 26 years I've seen these dogs come in, maybe they have some loose stools, vomiting, diarrhea, maybe just a little lethargic, and you go through the whole gamut, the whole questioning gamut, I should say. Maybe do blood work and you find a few liver enzymes that are elevated. The only common denominator is, well, yeah, we sprayed, we had the lawn company or the yard company come out and they spray it. So we have to think about, our pets are not only absorbing this through their feet, but they're also smelling the vegetation that has these chemicals on it. Being aware that some of these long-term, long-acting flea and tick products can be very dangerous, especially for an older or debilitated dog. So, a lot of factors to take into consideration. Turning your Wi-Fi off at night so you're not having the chaotic EMFs in your home. I've seen so many instances where the animals around the computers, around the cell phones, and they're more sensitive to these frequencies, these chaotic electromagnetic frequencies than we are. And especially if you live close to a 5G tower. We'll be finding out more about this, and we can even talk about 5Gs and electromagnetic frequencies somewhere down the road. But again, just trying to create a natural space for our dogs, I think is super important.
So I know that we can find holistic veterinarians on the, and you'll have to give me the initials, the American Association of Holistic Vets. Is that what it is?
It's AHVMA.
Okay.
That's the American Holistic Veterinary Medical Association.
Got it. Unfortunately, in my area, there are not many. I have to drive at least an hour to find, which is not a bad drive, mind you. I would do 2 or 3 easily. But because many people don't have that luxury, or their vets are far more traditional, when we go in sometimes and we talk about, my dog eats a raw diet, or no, I don't want your flea and tick product. And by the way, I want you to separate my vaccines out 3 or 4 weeks apart, and we're going to titer this one, and so on. We often find conflict with having those conversations with the veterinarian. What would you advise us of how to approach that, or things that we can do to make those more integrative?
Boy, that's a loaded question. No, that's okay, because there's some conventional practitioners that are open to learning new things, but they're very far and few between. Mm-hmm. Bottom line, I would say never feel bullied. Never feel bullied into doing something to your dog that you don't feel intuitively is right. So if you're, and I have plenty of studies here that talk about dogs that develop autoimmune conditions, heart failure, diabetes, I mean, any medical condition after their vaccinations, yet you can't get any conventionally trained practitioner to put 2 and 2 together and go like, oh, we might have had a vaccine reaction here. Yeah, it's tough, but you can also contact some of these veterinarians that are members of the AHVMA. You can go to their website, and they have a link called Find a Vet, and you can search by name, you can search by locality. And so a lot of times I consult with people all over the country. I've got people in California, Minnesota, Arizona, Colorado, Kentucky, Ohio, Tennessee, Florida. I mean, it's just endless. And that's the beauty of what I call telemedicine. Now, I have to have medical records, and I have to have documentation that your animal has been to the veterinarian and had a specific diagnosis before I can actually give you recommendations of what to do, even holistically. But it's out there. It's out there. And I know that there are, I would just say that you could go to the AHVMA website. There is another organization called the Veterinary Medical Aromatherapy Association, and I know that at least 3 of the veterinarians there do online consultations with clients.
So if a dog mama went to the vet, got a diagnosis of whatever, and has either x-rays or blood work or lab work, all that jazz, they then could call you and say, what are my options to what a traditional vet might be recommending? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely, Dana.
How would they reach you?
Well, I can give you my contact information.
Okay. We'll put that in the notes of the website as well.
Sure.
But go ahead and say it here so that those that are listening will have it.
Probably the easiest way to contact me is by email, and that email, all lowercase, is DRB, like D as in dog, R as in Robert, B as in boy, FOX @yahoo.com.
Okay. Any final thoughts you want to share?
I think
fantastic.
This has been fun, and I really think that these podcasts are going to be so important for getting people educated. If there's a better way, medicine and drugs and surgery, has its place. They do have their places, I should say, but we want to make sure that we're taking care of our animals preventively and not just waiting till disease raises its ugly head and then scrambling to try to fix the problem.
And I think that's true even with behavior. I made a post just this week. I often get the call when people are desperate, or, you know, the dog's like looking at euthanasia because they don't know what else to do. And I'm sort of sometimes a last hope to fix it. And I'm like, please don't wait until you're desperate. Start now, whether it's a, you know, proactive lifestyle for wellness, or, you know, the first indication of something new going on in your dog's health or new in their behavior. Start the moment you see those things, not when it's, you know, the end of possibilities. So.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times these dogs are adopted without any thought of their personality or their breed predispositions and so on and so forth. So that's an excellent idea, Dana. I forgot about the behavior part of that.
Okay, so once again, your website is?
Okay, learn, LEARN barbfoxdvm.com.
Okay, and that's where people can find classes on nutrition, the vaccine class you mentioned, essential oils depending on dog, cat, or horse, right?
Right.
And then they can also reach out to you for services if needed. And
yes, consultations.
Seriously, y'all, if you haven't read the book, The Animals Never Lie, you need to go read that. It is a lot more of these case studies that Dr. Barb has been sharing with us today. So thank you so very much for being here. And as I said when we started, I definitely want to have you come back for more topics.
Thank you, Dana. It's been fun. And thank you guys for listening.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Barb.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.